welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the Commander staples that I will be putting in my Golgari decks. So continuing on with my series of the staples that I typically go for whenever I'm making a deck, these are the things that I add to my deck first before I start getting into the meat and bones of whatever I might be doing in that deck. And that typically is stuff like removal, card draw, ramp. Those are the three big categories I think that you need in every Commander deck. And of course, depending on the color combination you're playing, that will change drastically. Golgari, of course, which is black and green. For those who don't know, I know there's probably a lot of newer players out there that aren't actually sure what these terms mean. It's black and green together, has a lot of upsides. It's probably my favorite two-color combination. There is almost nothing that this color combination can't do well. I know everyone loves Simic. Pretty much the only thing that Golgari can't do that Simic can is counter spells. Black and green does everything else just as well and does other things even better. So I'm going to start out with the removal, which is something that Golgari does maybe better than any other color combination. I don't know, Orzhov might be better. That's about it. And you have the obvious stuff, you know, Beast Within, Infernal Grasp. As I've said many times, I'm going to put Beast Within in any deck that has green. I think it's the best removal spell in the format. Toxic Deluge, of course, if your deck is black, you're going to put Toxic Deluge in there because it's one of the best board wipes in the entire format. You also could go with a lot of creature options as well because Golgari decks tend to do a lot of graveyard and creature stuff, right? So Plague Crafter, Thrashing Brontodon, there's lots of creatures that have removal abilities stapled on them. So if you want to be filling your graveyard with creatures, like I do in my Pharika deck, for example, I'm going to lean more towards those creatures that are removal. Maybe you just want to recur them if you're in a recursion theme, which a lot of those decks do as well. So for that reason, you might want to lean towards the creatures. You might want to do the same with the ramping, skipping ahead here a little bit. Yes, you can put the Cultivates and the Kodama's Reaches in there, of course. And I haven't really talked about these cards at all, even though they're some of the most popular in the entire format. These cards are great in any deck where you are more than one color. I wouldn't put either of these in a mono green deck myself. I think they're better in two colors because they go get two different basic lands, right? If you're in a two-color deck, you can go get a forest and a swamp, right? So you're color fixing yourself as well as ramping. That's what makes these cards great. But again, stuff stapled on creatures like Farhaven Elf or Yavimaya Elder, which is a personal favorite of mine, can be even better in Golgari decks because you're probably doing a graveyard theme or recursion theme or sacrifice theme. There's lots of those decks that these abilities stapled on creatures will work even better. However, I'm going to, in this video, start leaning more towards the actual cards that are black and green, rather than talking about all the same cards over and over again in these videos, Beast Within and Toxic Deluge and whatnot. I'm going to start leaning more towards the cards that specifically fit in Golgari decks. So that's what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this video. And getting back to the removal, of course, as I said, Golgari has some of the best in the format. Casualties of War and Windgrace's Judgment are two fantastic removal spells that I have put in pretty much all of my black and green decks. Surprisingly, don't see as much play as I thought they would. These are cards that when they first got spoiled, I thought were going to go in every deck. I mean, Casualties of War, 2 black, black, green, green, sorcery. Choose one or more, which means you can choose one or you can choose as many as you want. Destroy an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, a land, or a planeswalker. Man, this is an absolute blowout sometimes. Even if this is just I destroy a land, creature, and artifact, which all three of those are a guarantee in a Commander game. 6 mana to destroy an artifact, creature, and land is fantastic. If you can get the enchantment and the planeswalker as well, it's a complete blowout. I've cast this card a few times where I've hit all 5 targets, and there has been a couple of games where I've hit all 5 targets on one player. You have one guy that is so far ahead of everyone else. Casualties of War can completely put that person behind now by hitting these 5 targets just from that one person. Windgrace's Judgment, again, you're hitting the best permanent from each of your opponents, right? It's instant speed, it's 5 mana. That's kind of a lot, but for any number of opponents, destroy target non-land permanent that player controls is pretty good. You get to knock off the best permanent from each of your opponents and do it at instant speed. I'm surprised this card doesn't see more play. Culling Ritual is another fantastic one. Sort of a pseudo board wipe, 2 black and a green sorcery. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less. And then you add black or green for each permanent destroyed this way. So it's a pretty decent board wipe on top of being a ritual effect. And when this came out in Strixhaven, I gushed over it because I was like, man, this is the kind of card that I absolutely love. And what I particularly love about it is it's going to deal with a lot of different themes, like particularly the token theme, right? Tokens are usually their mana value 0, so you're going to knock all those out of the way, right? And then on the added bonus of getting all that mana on top of it, I'm looking at this card though as more of a removal spell. To me, the ritual effect is an added bonus. I'm not going to rely too heavily on the ritual for I need to cast my command or something like that. The targeted removal, of course, Assassin's Trophy, which again, you could argue is the best removal spell in the entire format, hits any permanent, lands included, instant speed, it's only 2 mana, just got reprinted in Double Masters, which is great because we need more reprints of these spells that are going to be going into every deck. If I'm playing a deck that has black and green, I'm going to try to shoehorn this in there. Death Sprout is another one that has been a favorite of mine for quite a while. 1 black, green, instant, destroy target creature, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So 4 mana instant speed destroy creature is not great, but it's ramp as well. So this one's kind of interesting where it's a ramp spell and creature removal in 1. Interesting option if you're looking for something a little different. Binding the Old Gods is another one that is a favorite of mine that is doing something similar. 2 black and a green saga, and when it enters the battlefield, of course, chapter 1 is going to be destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So right out of the gate, this is 4 mana, destroy any non-land permanent. Just that alone, I think, is worth it for this card. But then you get to chapter 2, you get to search your library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And of course, that means you can get anything that is a forest. Doesn't have to be a basic forest. You can even go get a Dryad Arbor if you want to and put that into play with this guy. And then the last chapter, creatures you controlled gain death touch until end of turn, which can also be really handy as well. I think this is a really underrated removal option in black and green. I mean, the list is almost endless. Maelstrom Pulse, Abrupt Decay. Black and green colors are so good at this, especially when you combine the two, right? Abrupt Decay, of course, can't be countered. Only hits things with mana value 3 or less, but that's not going to be a problem in a commander game. It really just depends on what your preference is. I like Maelstrom Pulse, even though it's a sorcery. I know people don't like sorcery speed removal, and the destroy target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name doesn't seem to be very good in the commander format. But as I've already discussed many times on this channel, the same name thing works fantastic for tokens. So again, I can destroy all my opponent's Saproling tokens or elf tokens with this card, which can be good. But just 3 mana and I destroy any non-land permanent, it's pretty good too, right? So there's never going to be a bad card, but it can also be a really, really good card in certain situations. I mean, you got Putrefy. I don't know if anyone's still playing this card. I don't anymore. In fact, I very quickly started taking this out of my decks. I started playing it in the beginnings because, you know, it was a card that everyone put in their commander decks. Didn't take me long to start taking this out of all my black and green decks because there were just so many better options. Again, all the ones I just named, plus all those creature options as well, plus all the mono green and mono black options. It is still one of the most popular Golgari cards on EDH Rec. Lots of people are still playing it. I know they stick it in those precons. To me, it's just so far down the list as far as Golgari removal goes. I don't think I would ever put this in a deck. Some interesting card draw options if you're in a Golgari deck. Moldervine Reclamation's a fantastic one. 3, a black and a green enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card, so you're getting the life gain as well. And what makes this card particularly good is it doesn't care if the creature is a token, right? That's always super, super important when you're thinking about deck building. If you're in that token theme, this is a great option for you. Again, I have that Pharika deck, which is making tokens. So this is a phenomenal fit there because when those snake tokens die, I am getting the life gain and the card draw off of it. Even if you're not doing any sort of sacrifice or any sort of theme like that, just any of your creatures dying, you get to gain a life and draw a card. That's fantastic. Death Reap Ritual is another fantastic one that's been a commander staple for a long time that I like to use. 2 black and a green enchantment, has Morbid at the beginning of each end step. If a creature died this turn, you may draw a card. So again, maybe you will lean more towards the actual theme of sacrificing or destroying creatures or whatever the case may be to guarantee this trigger, but I promise you if you throw this card on the battlefield, you will be getting lots of card draw off this without even trying. Creatures are always dying all over the place in a commander game, and this is at the beginning of each end step, right? So on your turn, probably very easy to make sure you have a creature die, and then on your opponent's turn, they happen to have a creature die on their turn in combat, or they sacrifice a creature to some effect, you're going to get a card draw at the beginning of their end step, and so on down the line. Really great card draw option in black and green. Couple other cards that I really like. Rushed Rebirth, black and a green instant. Choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it on the battlefield, tapped and shuffle. This card is really fantastic in a commander game. This does not have to be your creature. You can just sit there holding up 2 mana and one opponent decides to kill another opponent's creature, and in response, you choose that creature. And it's gonna die anyway, you know it is, because there's a removal spell on the stack. Let's say it's their commander, it's a 6 mana creature, and now when it dies, you get to go search through your library for any creature with mana value 5 or less and put it directly onto the battlefield. That seems really good. You could throw this in any Golgari deck and it'll be fantastic for you. Of course, if you're planning around it, it can be even better, right? I have in a Name is One deck, my other black and green deck, and I plan on my creatures dying a lot, particularly my commander, because it has that dice trigger. So with this, obviously, if I plan on sacrificing my commander or having it die, I can target my commander with it, and of course it costs 12, so I can get anything out of my deck and put it directly into play. Extra fantastic there. I really like this card a lot. Creekwood Liege is another one that I just don't think sees enough play. 1 and 3 hybrid Golgari mana, so black and green times 3. It's a horror, it's a 2/2. Other black creatures you control get +1/+1. Other green creatures you control get +1/+1. So a great anthem effect for all your creatures, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a 1/1 black and green worm creature token onto the battlefield. This card can go in any Golgari deck and it will be fantastic, I think. The great thing about this is the worm creatures you are creating are black and green, and they get both anthems, right? If you have a black and green creature, it's going to get the first anthem and the second anthem. So the worms you are creating are going to be 3/3s as soon as they are created. That's pretty darn good. I mean, just a creature that is spitting out a token like that every single turn is not easy to come by. That is a really powerful effect. And then on top of that, getting that double anthem. This is a really great card. Try it out in your Golgari decks, even if you're not doing anything in this theme at all, and it's going to give you tons of value, I promise. And of course, I gotta talk about Deathrite Shaman. This is a card that I do have in a deck. It's a very infamous, powerful card. And again, it is a card that could go in any Golgari deck. So it is 1 black and green hybrid mana. So a 1 mana creature, Elf Shaman 1/2. And it's got lots of great abilities that are always going to be very usable. So you can tap it, exile target land card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So it's a mana dork. Not the greatest mana dork ever, but it is a mana dork. You can exile those lands from your graveyard or your opponent's. Pay 1 black, tap, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life. So again, you can hit any graveyard with this. Having your opponents lose life is always going to be good, and you can pay green and tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard. You gain 2 life. Another very usable ability. I would not shoehorn this into any Golgari deck. This is one of those cards that is infamously fantastic and powerful in the history of the game. I love the art too, by the way. Some of the best art ever, I think. However, this is one of those cards that for me is, because of the reputation it has, people just shoehorn it into all their decks, even though it might not be good. I mean, it's always going to be good, but maybe not as good as some other options you could have. What makes this card great for me is its graveyard hate, right? You can exile creatures and instants and sorceries from your opponent's graveyard. And as I say all the time, you have to have graveyard hate, and this is graveyard hate. The fact that you're making your opponents lose 2 life or you gain 2 life is good. The mana dork part is probably the one you're going to use the most on this. The graveyard hate for me is what puts this up there as a really fantastic card in the format. You gotta have graveyard hate in your decks. You can do this at instant speed if your opponent's about to reanimate a creature out of the graveyard or something, so that can be really handy. Again though, for me this is not, even though it is a really fantastic card throughout the history of the game, not one that I'm necessarily going to shoehorn into all my Golgari decks. I know there's people that are going to disagree with me and they do put it in all their decks, but for me it's not an auto include. It is just, does it fit what I'm doing? Getting to some of the lands, and again, I'm not going to keep regurgitating the same lands that I think you should put in every deck. Check out my utility lands video. Check out my other lands video for options there if you want to look for things that will fit in your decks. I will give a call out to Grim Backwoods. This is an interesting one that again specifically fits in a Golgari deck. Taps for colorless mana but has 2 black and green. Tap, sacrifice a creature, draw a card. Just a really neat card draw option on a land. You know, if you're looking for a utility land that's going to fit in your Golgari deck, 5 mana essentially, because you have to tap this land and 4 others in order to draw a card, and you have to sacrifice a creature, doesn't seem great. I just like stuff like this in my decks so that later in the game, maybe I'm running out of gas, I can sack a useless creature to draw a card. Also, it's a sack outlet. It's an expensive one, but it is a sack outlet. 100%. And a lot of those black-green decks want to be doing that. I also will briefly talk about Boseiju and Takenuma, and I will mention these again. I'm not going to mention them every time, but I will mention them a few times at least. They just go in every deck. I talked about this when I did my Kamigawa Neon Dynasty best cards list. These were at the top. All these Kamigawa cycle. Boseiju's the best by a mile. Being able to just discard it to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land is incredible in a commander game. Takenuma's not so bad either, right? Just discard it, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, you're always going to want to be doing that in a commander game. So I'm not going to be mentioning these guys over and over and over again, but I think we all know by now that if you can find room for these in your deck, and you probably can because they do tap for green and black mana respectively, so there's really almost no reason not to put them in your decks, you should try. But that is it. That is my Golgari, also known as black and green staples list. That's what I'm going to be putting in my decks. Again, this always changes depending on what your deck is doing, but most of these cards I'm going to be putting in my decks as sort of the base, right? Usually I'm between like 25 and 30 cards. That is sort of the meat and potatoes of my deck, and then I'm building whatever my deck is doing on top of that, right? That's sort of what's going on here with these staples lists. But what did I miss? What are you guys throwing in all your Golgari decks? No matter what you're doing in there, you just got to have it in there. Let me know in the comments below. But that is it for today. And thanks for tuning in.